It's taking some time, but it's working.
Yeah, it says it's working now.
Yeah, it's taking a little bit of time. Okay. Okay, everybody, welcome to the DVAA Astrophotography Workshop for June 2024. Today, we're going to have a presentation by Andrew Hitchner on landscape astrophotography, and we might have something else special after that, depending on how that goes. All right, off you go, Andrew.
All right, let me share my screen here. Can everybody see that? Okay. All right. I take silence as a confirmation. Uh,
Yes, looks perfect.
no, that's fine. Also, I cannot see the chat because I'm full screen here. Please feel free to ask any questions at any time. You can interrupt me, or you can always hold questions till the end as well. But all right, yeah, my name is Andrew Hitchner. For you that don't know me, I was the DVA observing chair for a while. I left that position about 2 years ago, since taking a little bit of a hiatus, but uh, looking to get back into it casually. Don't be signing me up for any positions, please, board positions. But here I am, ready to give this talk to you. And tonight I'm going to focus on the introduction to landscape astrophotography. And I think Lou put a good description about it in the meeting invite as well, and on the website. How I do want to emphasize that this is a really easy way to get into astrophotography. It's a pretty unique way to do astrophotography as well. We'll talk about that. But as you'll see, and I'll talk about, you really can get away with some pretty introductory equipment and still come away with some really great photos. So without further ado, we'll jump into it. So I'll talk a little bit about what landscape astrophotography is, at least to me, how I define that. Talk a little bit about how or what equipment is needed, and then I'll walk you through the workflow of planning, shooting, and editing the shots. And then I also have like an example shot that will follow through about how I planned the shot, how I took the shot in the field, and then finally how I created the final image that you'll all get to see. And right up at front, I have my resources for you. Really, these three resources I learned a significant amount of my photography experience from. I went to school at RIT for imaging science. I quickly learned that while it teaches me all about how cameras work, it does not teach me how to take a nice photo. So these have been my three big resources here. One is Alan Wallace. You can find him on YouTube. He also has a great book called Photography in the Night Sky. I don't know how much of that will be published. I did check though last week, and he still has some available there. Adam Woodworth is another one. He has less of an online presence, but he is a great book as well. Night Sky Photography, a little less dense than Alan's. So if you want a quicker read, I suggest going to Adam's. And then Nigel Danson, he's a YouTuber, full-time landscape photographer. You can learn a lot about just landscape photography in general, especially about composition and stuff, which does play into landscape astrophotography. And also, he talks a lot about the camera settings and all too. So, what is landscape astrophotography? Well, I define landscape astrophotography as wide field with some inclusion of the foreground. So it's some combination of daytime landscape photography with that includes the sky in it. So really, if you think about the whole composition of a photo, the composition of the photo includes the night sky, be it the Milky Way, planets, constellations, all that, and also in the ground, and also the ground, the foreground. So that includes, when we think about our typical compositions, leading lines, rule of thirds, and all, the sky and the ground play into those and then complement each other in landscape astrophotography. Now, don't be fooled. This does not need to be done with wide angle lenses. You can get some really cool shots, with 35 millimeters up to 50 millimeters or so would be kind of the cutoff. There's some great examples online. As you increase the focal length, then, or sorry, as you decrease the focal length, then it tends to make faraway objects look like really small and all. So like in this example over here, if I wanted to focus on this area and then have on the center of the Milky Way and then have the trees be really big, then I might want to choose, a 35 millimeter lens or something, which will kind of add the zoom effect onto that portion. So you don't need a wide angle lens to do landscape astrophotography. And this typically includes, multiple sky exposures, typically, what you would do with deep sky astrophotography as well. And then usually you'll need separate foreground exposures as well, but we'll talk about that. So we'll jump right into the equipment. So I would say that for camera wise, you need at least a DSLR or mirrorless camera. Post 2010, that's an arbitrary number that I came up with. That's because my camera is post 2010. But some considerations, I'd say the things that you need to watch out for when deciding if your camera can do this or if looking to purchase a new camera. One is sensor size. So if you're not aware, there are full frame sensors and then there are crop sensors. You just need to be aware that if you have a crop sensor, that you need to make sure that you have a lens that matches that sensor. Crop sensors are just smaller than full frame sensors. So you need to make sure that you have a matching lens for that crop sensor, and just know that that crop sensor will have less or worse noise performance than a full frame sensor. But it can still take great photos. I use a crop sensor, and all of the photos that I've taken in this presentation are with a crop sensor. In fact, my camera is up at the top there, that Nikon D3300, which we'll talk a bit about later. You also want to look at the noise performance, make sure that it has relatively good performance in low light. Lens selection, having a wider lens selection is great. Sony, Nikon, Canon, those are going to give you some really great lenses to choose from. If you want to go for more of the exotic cameras, which can be great, just know that you'll have less of a lens selection, maybe less budget options for those as well. And then really the big thing is the ability to select your mode. You're going to want to shoot in RAW, and you're going to want to change things like your manual mode to adjust the ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So if you have a point and shoot camera, you may or may not be able to do this with that camera. If you can change the point and shoot to go into a full manual mode, you'll probably be okay. If you can't, if it needs to focus on things and then tries to do everything for you, you might not be able to. Now, also, the nice thing is you do not need to be NIR modified to do this. In fact, NIR modifying your camera is going to make the foreground look a little weird, right? Because the NIR filter is there in order to have the camera take similar pictures to what we would see with our eye. Our eyes are not sensitive to NIR light. Sensors by themselves are, so the camera manufacturers put in this filter and able to block it so it looks closer to what we do. If you take off the NIR filter, you're going to find that your foregrounds are going to be really bright, and you're going to find out that the color doesn't really match, especially if you have a lot of foliage in the foreground as well. So you don't need an NIR modified camera. In fact, I would actually recommend against it. If you wanted to use an NIR modified camera, you can. You could also do a fancy, two camera setup if you wanted to do, but I'm not going to talk about that here. The lenses. What do we want to consider when we're looking at lenses? So first off, there's three main portions of lenses that I think about. I think about the focal length, maximum aperture that the lens is going to allow, and then the aberrations in the lens, the quality of the optics in the lens. So focal length, really look for, generally speaking, longer focal length the better. I mentioned earlier that I would say 50 millimeters is kind of the longest that you would want to go before, you're going to start cutting off a lot of the foreground and you're just doing wide field astro at that point. And then I kind of talked about how if you can use a longer focal length lens to change that perspective of how the sky looks relative to the ground, kind of like zoom factor. Another thing you want to look out for is maximum aperture. You want to get the largest aperture possible. So larger aperture, of course, allows more light. However, because we're including the foreground, you need to think about depth of field, right? Because you can't just put it on infinite focus and then expect a rock really close to the lens if it's in the frame to be in focus. So when you're taking your foreground exposures, you might need to play around with that. You might need to do some focus stacking. Also, make sure that when you're purchasing a lens, if it's a zoom lens like the one I have, just take note if the maximum aperture changes depending on the focal length of the zoom lens. For instance, if you had a 11 to 16 millimeter wide angle lens and it says f2.8, you're going to want to make sure that that f2.8 is available at 11 millimeters and also available at 16 millimeters. Some lenses that changes while you're zooming. Also, aberrations are proportional to aperture. Those 11 millimeter lenses are going to have much larger or much more noticeable aberrations around the edges than, there's 35 or 15 millimeter lenses. So just keep that in mind as well. Speaking of aberrations, there are three that you want to look out for: chromatic, coma, and astigmatism. I have some examples up here. A chromatic, right, is that the wavelengths are not focused at the same place. So you get this kind of like ringing effect where you can see like the red, purple up here, and then the green's focused down there. This can easily be removed though in editing software. Coma cannot be removed in editing software. I mean, you might be able to, but it's not as easy as, clicking a button like chromatic is. Coma is where the focus point of the lens on this particular area of the lens, so usually around the edges, isn't focused directly at the center of the sensor. It might be focused a little up or down of the sensor. So it can kind of create this like comet shapes here that you're seeing. It's a little harder to correct. It's not impossible, but it's probably something that you're not going to want to do. And then, of course, there's astigmatism, where the focal plane is at an angle to the sensor due to the lenses. Now, these are things that you just want to watch out for. This wide-angle astrophotography, and really all astrophotography, is your tolerance to imperfections can make or break your wallet, right? If you have a higher tolerance to, some of these things, you say, oh, well, on the edges of my photos, I'm going to see a lot of coma and astigmatism. That's okay. Then you might be able to get away with, a cheaper lens. If you want to remove those, then you're going to have to go up a little bit. But that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being a perfectionist. And again, in general, this is with wide angle lenses are more prone to these aberrations. It's just harder to make glass and to do all of the optical engineering needed to reduce these aberrations across the entire lens. So just keep that in mind. All right, and then there's some miscellaneous stuff. The camera and the lens are the big portions. You are going to need a few other things though. For the tripod, you're going to need something sturdy, lightweight, definitely at least aluminum. You could really go for something carbon fiber to get even more sturdy and lightweight. Think about though that you probably need to walk to your locations for these. I haven't done any overnight hiking or anything, but I have definitely walked, 10 or 15 minutes from my car to get to my locations. So you're going to need to think about that when you're getting a tripod, because I needed to bring that with me. And also on the plane. Red light, definitely. You don't need to really be dark adapted, but it helps to have a red light, especially a headlamp, because then you don't need to hold it and you can fill around with the camera and stuff. Dress for the weather, get some lens wipes. I was once photographing on the beach, sand blowing everywhere. It turned out to be a great photo, but I was using the lens wipes pretty frequently on that one. Something that people don't think about with wide angle astrophotography is dew heaters. So I don't use dew heaters, but I'm usually only out there for 30 minutes or so. If you're going to be out there for a long time, trying a bunch of different compositions, moving around the camera, enjoying the night sky, taking a lot of photos, you're going to need some dew heaters. And they sell, I think this is from Thousand Oaks Optics. They make really great stuff. They make good filters and all. They make great dew heaters too. This one would just wrap around the edge of your wide angle lens. You can plug it into dew heater control. I think they sell some 12-volt outlets too, and it'll be dew free. Software. Everybody likes to talk about software. I recommend Lightroom and Photoshop. You may or may not need Photoshop, depending on the photo. I'll show some examples of when you would or would not need it. And Lightroom, I just like Lightroom because I also do a lot of daytime photography. There are plenty of free software. I think Snapseed's one on your phone that you can use, but there's other software to allow those general photo editing tips. I think GIMP is GIMP is one as well. You will need some kind of stacking software, specifically a stacking software that will freeze the ground. So it won't stack the ground, but it will stack the stars. I'll talk about that later. But those two software that I'm aware of is Sequator for Windows and Starry Landscape Stacker for Mac. I have a Windows machine, so I'll also use Sequator, but it's pretty much the equivalent workflow in Starry Landscape Stacker as well. And this is very optional, but I want to put it out there. Topaz AI puts out some great products, and I specifically use their denoise product. I think it's a really cool product. They have like 4 different algorithms, denoise algorithms in there that they all run at the same time, and you can like pick and choose which one you like. It's pretty cheap. I think it's like $15 or $30. They're updating it constantly. Check them out. They make some really cool stuff. And then optional apps, use some kind of weather apps. Photophil's photography app, I listen to this as optional, but I use it all the time. That's the best $5 app that I ever purchased. I do not regret it one bit. That's an awesome app. And then an intervalometer makes taking these exposures pretty easily, as much as I just push a button and then I get to enjoy the sky while my photos are going, and then I get to see all the car headlights ruin my photos so that I get to start over. But would recommend an intervalometer as well. So this brings me to my number one tip of the night. Go into the description of the talk on the website. Do not let me or anybody else tell you what you need to take these kinds of photos. If your camera can take photos, if you have a DSLR camera that lets you do manual mode, I bet you that you will be able to do this landscape astrophotography. Will it get you a cover print on National Geographic? Probably not, unless you have like a Sony Alpha, sitting around. But will it give you a good photo that you can show your friends and family and they're like, hey, look at this cool thing that I did? It absolutely will. Will it also let you learn and figure out what you do need so that you can upgrade later? Absolutely. So use what you have, find out what you need, and then work on the upgrades later. You really don't need much. So that being said, my equipment, I have a Nikon D3300. It's a crop sensor and just 24.2 megapixels. I think it was made in like 2013 or something. You can get it on eBay for like $150. Tokina lens. So this is a pretty good lens for DX. It is f2.8 across the entire zoom range. 11 is way out there, but I don't usually use 11, but it's there for me. But again, this is only like $150. So $300 will get you a good kit to just start this, and you can take some pretty great photos, like the photo I took here and on the right. I have an L bracket that lets me kind of orient the camera a little easier on my tripod. I have an intervalometer. I put the brand there in case you want to take a look. But really, any Nikon intervalometer will work for mine, or you can just purchase it for your specific camera. I use a K&F Concept aluminum tripod, pretty cheap tripod. Not the sturdiest. If there's a strong wind, I might have some trouble, but thankfully I haven't come across that yet. And I use Astrospheric and Media Blue for my weather apps, and then Photo Pills, which I mentioned before. So here's an example of one of the images that I took. Is it perfect? No. Is it a beautiful image? I think so. And it was done with a pretty reasonable budget kit as well. You can see some of the aberrations right along the edges that we talked about, some astigmatism and coma specifically. But as long as you're shooting in the center, that might not be something that really bothers you that much. Or if it is, hey, that's fine. But just know that you're going to need to dish out a little more to get those more top line lenses for that. All right. So that's about equipment. So workflow. How did I take that previous photo into the photo that we're going to walk through? So I split up into really 3 phases. The planning phase, which I get to do in the comfort of my home, and going out in the daytime, where I choose the location and then I go out to plan the shot. The photography phase, where I actually take the photos. This usually involves taking the sky exposures and then taking separate foreground exposures. It could be one or multiple. We'll talk about that. And then finally, the editing phase, where you break out the computer and all the software. So you'll need to prep for sky stacking, stacked sky exposures, prep the foreground, blend the foreground, and then you can go wild at any creative adjustments, add your personal taste after that. Seems like a lot, but it's not too bad. So for this presentation, I'm going to walk through what I did to create this photo here. I took this photo at Big Meadows in Shenandoah National Park. I think only a 3-hour drive or so, 3-4 hour drive from here. Excellent. If you haven't been there, worth it to go. For the sky, I took 10 shots, 10 exposures each at ISO 1600 with a focal length of 11 millimeters and aperture f2.8. And then for the foreground, I took one single exposure at 5 minutes at an ISO 400, same focal length of 11 millimeters, and then same aperture at f2.8 to make this nice photo down here. So we'll walk through that, how I planned it, took the shots, and then did all the editing. All right, so first step was choosing the location. How, I knew that I was going to Shenandoah. How did I go about choosing exactly where I wanted to go? So when you're choosing your location, think about what you want to take and the darkness required for that. So if you want to take a picture of the Milky Way, you're going to want around Bortle 4 at least. I think this is Bortle 3 that I went to in Shenandoah. And it was pretty easy to see the Milky Way. If you can see it with the naked eye, you're going to get some great detail out in the photo. If you're only taking a photo of bright constellations, like I took a photo of Big Dipper and a comet, you can get away, with Bortle 6 or even in urban skies, really. If you wanted to do something in the city with a Big Dipper behind it, totally worth it. In fact, you probably wouldn't even need to do a foreground exposure then. So, and think about something interesting in the foreground, right? So I knew like Big Meadows had a lot of trees down, a lot of paths going around. I have a really wide field of the sky, so I can like line up the Milky Way. So think about that. And this also might be easier to go there, to pick the general location, but then to go there during the day, walk around, find compositions and stuff like that. So talk about that a little bit more in the next section. Also, consider the ease of editing. So mountains, lakes, oceans, they have a really defined line. Like if you look in this background photo, there's a really defined line on this hill here. That's really easy to edit in Photoshop to the point where you can click a button and then they pretty much does it for you. Trees are a little more difficult. I ironically took this photo at Shenandoah when I was very new, and I didn't make it easy for myself. I had to really work hard on getting those branches up into the sky blended in correctly. So think about that. Google Maps Street View is a great way if you're just sitting at home to try and figure out the area, what's around you, think about compositions, things like that. For light pollution maps, I also like to go to this website here. I think they have the entire world really, and it's pretty accurate. But you can Google light pollution map, and there's a lot of resources. So all right, planning the shot. So you've chosen a location. I recommend going to that location and going in the daytime. So think about, you're going to be doing this at night. You're going to be excited about going out there to see the sky. You're going to be anxious about clouds. You're not really going to want to think about, well, how do I drive there? Where am I going to go in the dark kind of stuff? So go in the daytime, make it easy on yourself. Plan how you're going to get there. Walk around, enjoy the area, look for compositions. I didn't know that dead tree was there until I went there. And then I went there and then I used my PhotoPills app. I figured out when the Milky Way would be above. And then I said, all right, I'm coming back to this exact place later on in the dark. It's really easy and it was no problem at all. So the PhotoPills app. This, you don't need this, but I highly recommend it. Again, it's like $5. I don't regret it at all. So it will show you the Milky Way position in respect to a certain time and place. And you can put a pin down exactly where you're going to take that photo. And it also has some cool augmented reality where you can like calibrate your phone and then move your phone around and then see, where the Milky Way will be in the tree there in front of you. So it's really cool. So I have this little video here. Hopefully it plays. Yeah, there we go. So as it gets dark here, you can see these dots. This is where I took the photo. Trees like right over here. You can see these dots. These dots are the Milky Way. These larger dots here are the Milky Way core. So I know that at 9:33 p.m., the Milky Way core is going to be, I think this is northern oriented. You can change, yeah, it's north up. So it's going to be about south from there. And then a little later in the dark, all right, well, here it looks like the Milky Way core is going to be at around its maximum height in the southeast there. And then I'm just sliding over the time here, watching how the Milky Way core decreases until finally it's in the daytime. So I use this app all the time. I move this pin around all the time, figuring out, where are things. Back here, it's like, okay, well, the Milky Way is going to be around there. Well, there's these trails around here and stuff. There's these trees that will probably be good. It's a great app to use. It also helps with working out the timing of my exposures, because it has an exposure calculator. It has a few different ways to calculate the exposures, which we'll talk about. But I, as you can tell, I love this app, so would recommend getting it. Also, when you're on site in the daytime, take some test shots with the lens that you're going to use. Kind of line up, see, what the lens is going to see, what the extent of the foreground is going to be. Really, less fumbling around in the dark is for the better, right? And if you're going to do multiple locations, then I would recommend doing this for each of those locations. All right, so taking the shots. So the goal is to get several exposures that you can then stack later. So stacking, I'm sure you guys are aware, decreases noise and then increases the contrast, basically increases your SNR. It also has the benefit of removing satellites and then any blemishes or something frame to frame. Starry Landscape Stacker and Sequitur will do that for you. Now here's where PhotoPills comes in again. You can easily calculate the exposure time that you will want relative to the focal length and your camera. So if you want barely noticeable star trails, you can use the 500 rule. It's very simple. Take 500 divided by the focal length of the lens that you're using. That's your exposure time. I don't really recommend that. Maybe if you're like, I don't know, maybe if you really wanted to stretch it, that's going to be a little optimistic. You're going to get barely noticeable trails, but if you zoom in, this picture in the background is probably a good example. I bet they use the 500 rule. You can still see the trails on there because the 500 rule doesn't take into account the megapixels or the size of the pixels of your actual camera. Because if you have larger pixels, then you can tolerate a longer exposure. If you have smaller pixels, then what's really creating the star trails is the star moving from pixel to pixel. So you'll have to take a shorter exposure, which the 500 rule might not account for. This is where the NPF rule comes into play, which PhotoPills has and which I use all the time. I usually do the NPF rule like plus a second, because unless you really zoom in, you're not really going to notice star trails too much. So another reason why I like PhotoPills. When you're taking your sky shots, you're going to want to use your widest aperture allowed, and you're going to be one at infinity focus. I said f3, that's another arbitrary number that I came up with. I use f2.8 all the time, but for whatever zoom you're using, make sure that aperture is wide open to collect as much light as possible. ISO depends on the camera. 3200 is a good starting point. If you have a good camera, my camera's noise performance is terrible at that. It really decreases the SNR, so I think I settle for 1600 or so. But play around with it. And then you're going to want to shoot for 12 to 15 exposures to stack. So maybe take 20 exposures or something in the field, knowing that you're only going to use 12 to 15. Stacking more than those, you don't really get a lot of benefit, and it's just taking some time out there, which you can be using for your enjoyment or for taking more photos. So here's an example of a sky shot that I took at Shenandoah. Notice that the stars, I think this was at 10 seconds, the NPF rule, they gave me 9 seconds-ish, so I did 10. You can kind of see some of the star trails. It's a little hard to know. This is probably due to an aberration, especially up in the corners. So if you look in the middle there, those are pretty good stars. They're pretty pinpoint. They're not perfect, but it's pretty good when viewing on just a wide screen or on your cell phone or something. This foreground, though, is not useful. It is very dark. If I could bring this in the Lightroom and crank up the exposure, I could use filters and all that, but it's going to be so noisy, there's not really a lot of data there. But the sky is perfect. So this is when I would look at that and I would say, hey, I need to take some foreground shots here because that foreground is underexposed. I can't really do anything with it. if the moon was out, I might be able to get away with it. I might not need any foreground shots. I could stack them, freeze the ground, and say, hey, I'm good. But if you think it's too dark and you're out in the field, you might as well take some foreground shots. So the goal is to properly, with the foreground shots, to properly expose the foreground to some reasonable SNR so that when you bring it in to edit later, you can play around with the brightness and the noise won't be too noticeable. So to do that, picture yourself taking a photo in the daytime because you don't need to worry about the stars now. You're taking stationary objects on the ground. There might be some wind or something which you might need to take into account, but the ground's not really moving. You can take as long of an exposure as you like. So reduce that ISO. I would say at least 600. You could go even less. I think for that the photo we're working through, I had 400 ISO. The exposures can range from 10 seconds to 5 minutes or more. Consider your wind, nearby roads for cars or something, any other moving objects, but generally speaking, you can take your time. The foreground's not moving anywhere. So I usually bracket the exposure. I'll do like a 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 5 minutes, and then look at the results and then see is that good enough or not. Now pay attention to focus. I mentioned this when I was talking about the depth of field. So objects close to the camera may or may not be out of focus. I recommend starting at infinity focus, but then when the picture comes up on the back of your camera, zoom in to those places near you, the rocks or something. Check and see if they're in focus. If they're not in focus, take another exposure and turn the depth of fields down so that you can bring those into focus. Because you can always use a photo stacking in Photoshop later on. It adds a little more work, but it's doable. Just make sure that you're getting everything in that foreground in focus in at least one image. And you can stack them later. So here's an example of one of my foreground shots. The sky is unusable. The sky is washed out, right? This is a 5-minute shot. That's okay. I already have my sky shots. What I'm worried about now is the foreground. So it's 5 minutes. There was a little bit of wind, so it's blurry. You can sharpen things up in post-processing and all. I had a car go through here. If that's okay, I can maybe use the sky shots for here and blend that in. But this is something that I would look for to say, hey, that's good enough. The SNR in this region is pretty good. I have enough room to play with when I'm, brightening things up and all. And the stacking should be relatively easy except for these branches, so I'm good. So moving into the editing, what we got to do now. So we're going to take all of our raw files and load them in a Lightroom or your editing software. All of your sky and foreground shots. And you really want to make them consistent to reduce any headaches later on. So in order to do that, take all your sky images, set them to some neutral color temperature and tint. Make sure there's no tint's very finicky. I don't play around with tint. So make sure that's at 0. Make sure your color temperature is neutral. And then for stacking purposes, you want to take some things into account as well. So Lightroom likes to be like, oh, you took this photo with this certain light, so I'm going to apply some distortion correction. Well, for daytime photography, that's great. For stacking nighttime photography, things get a little wonky when you do that because it's changing your images, it's adding a lot of metadata and stuff that the stacking software doesn't really use, and it can create a lot of distortions and effects in your stacked image. So remove your distortion correction, and then remove any sharpening at all that you had applied anyway. We'll add that back later. You can enable chromatic aberration, and then I would remove any noise reduction. But for luminance, you can enable color noise reduction. But this is nitpicky right here. Play around with things, see what works. Nothing's stopping you from going back and trying to stack with different settings applied later. But this is how I make sure that all my sky images are correct for stacking. Now, the foreground, the really important part here is to just make sure that the color temp matches the sky images. If it doesn't, then after blending, you're going to notice that the foreground color temperature is not really matching the sky color temperature, and it's going to be a little bit of a pain in the butt because you're going to need to edit the 2 layers by themselves to try and get them to match. But I would just do it now. And any sharpening on the foreground is fine because we're not going to stack the foreground We're just going, besides focus stacking, we're not going to use any stacking software to do that. So sharpening, noise reduction, and all in the foreground is A-okay. So we prepped everything, our sky images. Now we want to stack the sky images. So this will reduce the noise, increase the contrast. We need to stack the sky, which is moving from frame to frame, but we don't want to stack the ground. And that's where sequitur and starry landscape stack here comes into play, because we'll load in the images and then we'll create a mask that tells the software, hey, these are all the stars. These are going to be your registration points for the stars. But all of this stuff down here is the ground. Don't stack the ground. Like, there's a cutoff between the things I want you to align and stack, and then the things I just want you to leave alone. So the software then finds the stars, will register them, will stacks, export it to a final photo. You can also add a flat field or stuff, which we had a good discussion on earlier in the day. You should have a flat field for the lens and kit that you're using, but if you don't, that's fine. But you can add them right into sequitur, and then it will add the flats and the bias correction all for you in there. And then I export it back into Lightroom. So this sequitur tutorial is by Alan that I have over here, Alan Wallace. I mentioned him earlier. He has a great tutorial on how he does things. He also goes through all of the prep work as well. So if you didn't catch all of that, check out Alan Wallace's YouTube channel, and you can find his tutorial down there. It's pretty great. So here's an example of sequitur. I don't know which it is, but you can see over here that I have all of my star images loaded up. It's choosing the middle image as like the base image to align everything to, and then we'll also use the foreground from that image as well. So keep that in mind. If you had, in the first image here, if that was a good foreground, but then the middle image after you loaded it in had, I don't know, a person with a flashlight walking through, make sure that you switch them, because you don't want the person, in the ground. If you're not going to add your own foreground later, if you're just going to stack forever. I didn't add a noise, which would be your dark fields, and I didn't add a vignetting image, which would be your flats in this, but you definitely can. And then if you take a look down here, I told it that I want to freeze the ground, this aligned stars. I want to use an irregular mask. And what that let me do is I'd have this little brush here, and I just painted in the sky. And you can see all the green dots of all the registration points that it shows. It even noticed that, hey, this is a registration point, but the branches are not. And it did a pretty good job. And all this down here are registration points that it could have used, but it's going to throw them away because I said that it was round. So, unfortunately, I don't have a stacked. Well, yes, I do have an example of the output of this, but this is the basis of the sequitur or starry landscape stacker, and really the heart of this entire workflow: stacking star images, but then freezing the ground if I didn't want to add my own foreground shots afterwards. All right, so let's say you do want to add your own foreground. You took your own foreground image. How do we then blend that into the star background? So from Lightroom, I exported the stacked sky image and my foreground into Photoshop. I put the sky layer on top, and the goal is to create a mask that allows the foreground layer into the sky layer. So I have an example of this. And the quick selection tool, if you're familiar with Photoshop, that may work. It works really well for those sharp edges and flat horizons, which is something to think about when playing your show. If you have a more complex foreground, though, you might need to refine the mask with the brush tool. And I really recommend using some kind of softness in the mask. You don't want this like sharp transition from foreground to the background. It looks wonky. It looks like an over-sharpened image, really, which we know doesn't really look that nice. So make sure there's some softness there. It's okay if it's not exact. I'll show you an example of my mask in a second. And then just save the results as a TIFF, and then you can either continue editing in Lightroom, or you can edit it as a camera raw object in Photoshop. And the added benefit, you can edit the sky and the foreground by themselves too. which is kind of a bonus of this whole workflow. So up here we have the results of my sky stacking. See, I was able to pull out a little more detail here. There's data there. I just need to stretch it. And then we have my foreground exposure here. The sky is not usable, but I like the foreground. It looks a little wonky from my snipping tool, but it's there. So these are your layers in Photoshop. We want to put a mask down here so that the foreground appears with the sky. So here's a picture of my mask. I did keep, those trees from the sky because I didn't like this car down here. And notice there's a little bit of a transition. It's not some sharp cutoff between the sky and the foreground to make it look a little more natural. So after applying this mask, here's a result. I have the foreground down here, and then I have the stars up here. And then I can export that as a single image, play around with it, or I continue with Photoshop to mess around with each of the layers individually. So editing, creative adjustments, you can do whatever you want, really. These are just the tips, my usual workflow. I already talked about, blending it as exporting as a TIFF in Lightroom, or you can use the Camera Raw tool in Photoshop, which is basically Lightroom in Photoshop. Color balance is something that I go to first. I kind of like work my way from top to bottom in the Lightroom layout or in the Camera Raw tool layout. And first off is color temperature. That's a really easy way to add your own personal touch. For, daytime photography, I usually use a little warmer color. And then for nighttime, I like the blue tint to the sky, even though it's not usually there. The night sky isn't really blue, but I like it. I think it looks cool. So I usually use a cooler color temperature on my night images. You can play around with the light curve, adjust the blacks for the foreground and the shadows, and then the whites for the stars. One thing to note that the foreground should be darker than the sky. You can make the foreground brighter than the sky, but you're just going to end up scratching your head and be like, something's weird. Something doesn't really look right here. And that's because the foreground, in fact, this is a little bright. The foreground isn't brighter than the sky. There's a lot of stars out there, but there's not that much. Maybe if there's the moon out, but even then, I'd be careful cranking up the foreground exposure. The clarity slider is also great to make those stars really pop. So the clarity slider is a local contrast. It will take the edges of all of those stars and then sharpen those edges a little bit by changing the contrast, and just a little bit. Don't crank it. Just a little tiny bit will then just bring out all of the stars in the photo. It's really impressive how it does that. And then noise reduction. Lightroom has a lot of built-in noise reduction sliders. Color noise reduction, definitely want to use that. Just a little tiny bit will clean up a lot of it. And then you can also play around. Be careful with noise reduction because it's going to eventually interpret your stars as noise, right? And then you're going to lose a bit of contrast on your stars. So just be careful. This is where Topaz AI noise reduction comes in handy because they have some machine learning algorithms in there that notices, what stars are and then what aren't stars and what is noise, what's not noise. So I usually use Lightroom as a starting point, and then I kind of polish things off with Topaz. But you don't need to do that. So here is what I had before, post blending. And then here is my creative adjustments after that. So I'll show you here, not a lot of definition in the Milky Way. You can see the stars. The foreground, needs a lot of work, needs to be brightened. And then it's kind of bland, there's not a lot of color in there. So we can add some color to that. So here, look at all these stars that came up. The clarity slider, brings out all of these stars really by just adjusting the contrast around them. I added a little bit of exposure, but not a lot. And then really increase the shadows and blacks down here. So if we look here, we can see some of the adjustments that I made, played around with the light, really increased the shadows. So this tells me that I kind of underexposed the foreground. I wanted to do 1 or 2 more minutes to that guy. Played around with the color, like I said, turn that down a little bit, just a little bit, not a lot. Don't go crazy. Or do if you like that, but that's fine. And then effects, adding temperature, there's that color. The dehaze, be careful with that. The dehaze slider is really just changing the color. But in this case, I liked it. Like you can always reset it. So slide it around, see what happens. I added more vignette because I like that from a artsy fartsy sort of way, kind of like to bring your eye into the middle of the image. I added a little more vignette. Played around with the curve here just slightly, and then I didn't. You can change the hue, saturation, luminance of each. If you're going to take pictures of the middle of the Milky Way, focus on those reds and yellows and oranges because that's going to make down here really pop. And then there are clouds here, so I don't want to discourage you from not taking photos in the clouds because sometimes clouds can look pretty cool in night sky images. All right, so there's that. So that's it. So let's wrap up here. So again, try with the equipment that you have now. Do not say, I need to go out and get, the best performing camera in the dark possible. You don't need that. I don't have that. And I take photos that I like all the time. Plan. Use Google Street View, to plan from your house. Visit the site in the daytime. Organize yourself so that you can work efficiently and methodically in the dark. Maximize your time in the field. Take different exposures, take extra exposures, change your ISOs. I usually take one set of exposures at 800 ISO, one set of exposures at 1600, and then one set of exposures at 3200. If you're really gunning for the Milky Way in an exact spot, you might not have that much time, but usually I'm a little more lenient on that. So I make sure I have the data before I leave because I can't get more data once I'm gone. And then, watch your focus and your aperture too when you switch to those foregrounds. Foreground blending is the hardest part. Take your time. I watch a lot of videos on YouTube about blending and stuff. It takes a while to get the hang of it, but have fun with it and just take your time. And your creative adjustments are up to you. Don't let anybody else tell you what you like. Just do your thing and make photos that you like. So, all right. So, thank you. I'll leave this with this image from Arizona. I think this was like a Bordeaux 1 or something. It's definitely a dark sky I've been in. This is the moon, and this is Jupiter down here. So, you can see here, I didn't even need to take, this is just a single, well, it was just stacked star images. And the foreground, I kind of just left foreground as it was. With the moon, I didn't need to do anything. So, sometimes that just works. But yeah, thank you. I'll answer any questions that you guys have.
Very good, Andrew. I actually have a question. I really like the way you did the foreground, especially with such a, the foreground was so distant that light painting would never have worked
Right.
in that situation. But have you tried that, and what is it something you don't prefer, or is there?
Yeah, that's a good question, Lou. Thank you. I forgot about talking about light painting. Light painting is a matter of preference. I do not like light painting because it kind of looks like somebody parked a car behind you and it's just like artificially illuminating the sky, the foreground. I like to just, use the natural light from the sky, from the stars, to illuminate the foreground. There's more out there than you think. You can light paint. The number one thing I recommend if you're going to light paint is to move the light source. Don't just stand there with the flashlight or whatever light you have, because that's not going to evenly illuminate the foreground in front of you, right? Make sure that you move it around, and then that will better illuminate for you. And if you're going to light paint, you might get away like this picture here with not needing to do all the blending and stuff too. So if you're not keen on the blending, then you can go the light painting route as well. But personally, I don't like it because I don't really care for how it looks. But that's personal preference.
Great, Andrew. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions?
We have a couple of people on the YouTube channel. I don't know if they have any questions or not. I'll give them a minute because they're 30 seconds behind us.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions?
I mean, I have a comment about the light painting. I've done it a little bit with red light as well, but one of the things, if you do it, try to do it with the dimmest light possible because obviously you're exposing for it. You don't need a bright light. You actually want as dim as possible. So sometimes the light can be overpowering.
It's good. Good point, Scott. Thank you. Yeah, I hope this inspires some of you to go out. Which is I don't like equipment. You guys
So,
you guys and your
so
big
Andrew,
telescopes.
I'm curious, Andrew, with your photo, you said, it's one of your early ones. With the things you've learned, would you have done anything different with that same, setup and things with it, yeah, like that shot. Now that you do it again, is there anything you would have changed with everything you've learned, or would you pretty much do it the same way again?
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott. I think the number one thing that I would have probably tried to do is more exposure in the foreground. Like if you look at the edits, this is the edits that you need to do to make a good photo is really where you start to learn all the imperfections in your photo, right? So look at how much I changed the shadows here. I would really not recommend doing this to any photo because when you start doing this, you're really bringing out the noise too. Thankfully, I didn't have too much, and I was able to get away with it. But if you notice, it looks a little soft up here, and that's because I did do a lot of playing around with the noise reduction software and stuff. So definitely one thing that I would change here is taking a longer foreground exposure. I probably could have gotten away with at least 2 more minutes on this one. Also, I don't know. The composition's great. It's a beautiful image. But you can see here, even like I missed this guy, this branch here, this branch here. They're not really blended correctly. So I don't know if when I'm looking for compositions now, I probably would have passed on this and tried to find because again, I'm out there in the daytime. I'm looking around. I'm having a fun time hiking around in the daytime. I would have tried to see if there's another foreground composition that I could do, maybe with another tree, maybe with a path or something, something that would make it a little easier to blend in and make a better overall photo in next time. And then to go on that route a little more, this photo here is where I first really realized that I need to start getting better at focus stacking because you can't see it too well. But if you look out here, we're in pretty good focus. But look down here. You guys see my mouse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you look down here, that's not really in focus. So I kept this in focus at infinity the whole time. When I took my foreground exposures, I should have brought in that depth of field a little more, so that I could get probably this half in focus, and then I could have photo stacked it later. So that was a big learning point. And now whenever I'm out there, I'm always zooming around in my image because things look okay on the back of the camera, but don't be deceived. Use that zoom function and zoom in as far as you can and scan around the image and make sure that everything looks okay. So I didn't do that here, and that's something that I always do now.
Andrew, question about that.
Mhm.
Couldn't you just open up the aperture and focus, taking a picture, the equivalent exposure, and then just focus for the first, I don't know, 10, 15 feet, and then closed up the aperture a little bit more and had the depth of field
Sure.
the next. So then you have like 3 or 4 different depth of fields, and then combine them all together so that everybody's in focus.
Yeah.
How hard would that be to keep, the everything else exposed properly? Have you tried that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Lou. So what Lou's referring to, if anybody isn't aware, right, is that the easy way to increase your depth of field is to decrease your aperture because you're limiting the light rays to the middle of the optics, which is going to make things focus a lot better. The caveat to that though, right, is that you're going to let in less light. So I would say that it really, so while your plan is valid, right, to keep it at focus at infinity, and then instead of changing the focus, change the aperture, which would then move your depth of field, which would then allow the close things to be in focus at the expense of less light coming in. If you have a bright enough scene, if you have a camera with good enough, noise temperature, uh, stability, and all of that, that can take really long exposures, 10 minutes plus, that's a viable way of doing that. But I didn't want to be out there for that long. I haven't tried that, but maybe I would. But I would definitely take into consideration the brightness of the foreground to what if I was going to try that method.
Hey, Andrew, this is Stan. Just want to say thanks for the presentation. It was really excellent, and I loved all the detail you put in your slides. The question I have is, when you're taking your nighttime shots, have you ever run into any problems with like park rangers or the police wondering what you're doing?
Yeah, that's always the tricky part. I haven't, because I always make sure that I go somewhere that that I'm not going to be bothered because of those things.
Okay.
And that's happened to us though.
What's that?
So just telling Stan that's a valid point, because it's happened to all of us
Yes.
at one point or another.
Yeah, it is something that I'm always wary of. Also, I'm also thinking about general public as well, because I don't want people running through my photos. I don't really like people in general, besides you guys. But but yeah, no, that's something I will say. National parks are great because national parks are usually always open all the time. You need to be careful, but usually they are. Easiest way is to ask a park ranger. So that's why I knew when I was going to Shenandoah that it'd be okay. Long Beach Island, I knew that I'd be fine there. The Eagles Mere. I did have that happen at Eagles Mere. There was a guy kind of poking his head out and like shining a light at me every now and then. Thankfully, not during my photos. And because I was planning, right, I made sure that I was like in and out of there in jiffy. But this is a lake surrounded by like private communities. The lake is public. State park. Not all state parks are open all the time. National parks are. State parks are not. But yeah, and that's another thing in the planning section to look out for. So that's a great point.
Thanks.
Jeff, did you have questions? Jeff Chapman, you were watching on YouTube.
Hang on. Actually, no. You've got too much noise going on in the background, for starters. Well, there was one. I was just kind of curious as to local southeastern Pennsylvania. I got in here really late, in fact, by accident, and so I'm just curious as to where we can find local destinations that we can go, where the light pollution is acceptable and we can still get some a decent star. I mean, I have done Green Lane, and that was okay, but if you're trying to include the Milky Way in there, you really have to shoot really high or avoid shooting to the south. So the local destinations.
There's a French Creek. There's an area by where the swing sets are. I don't know the exact spot.
Familiar with that. Yep.
Yeah, and there's the lake right there.
Well,
If I don't know how dark it is, but if you can get the reflection off the lake there, I don't think it's going to be as good as Eagles Mere, but that's about as close as you're going to get to darkness here in southeastern PA.
Yeah, it's hard, unfortunately, and it's even harder finding an area. Going back to Stan's comment, like it's even harder finding an area open at night. It's unfortunate, but it's not. Look, it depends on your definition of local. But New Jersey has a bunch of dark areas. Southern New Jersey's pretty dark. Of course, you can go to the Pine Barrens and Long Beach Island and the Jersey Shore, besides Point Pleasant and all. it's pretty dark. So it's not terribly local. I think it's a good 2 hour drive or so. But I would poke around New Jersey too, and see what's around there.
Yeah.
All right, Andrew, thank you very much.
That's a great job, Andrew.
Yeah,
Yeah.
welcome.
And don't be a stranger. You're invited to even if you don't have a presentation, come and join us.
Sure, definitely.
You
Thank
know,
you guys.
the Wednesday before our meeting. Now, Gary, did you say you had something for us?
I actually do. Great job, Andrew. I'm really impressed with that. I love that kind of stuff too. And I second and third or whatever. I'll put up two hands. Your recommendation for photo pills, because
Yeah.
I've used that. I don't I have to admit I get a little confused by it because it has so many different options that sometimes I get a little confused by it, and because I don't use it frequently enough. But it's just been a great app for trying to figure out how things are lining up. So thank you again.
Yeah.
I use Planet on the Android, and I've had pretty good luck with that. PLANIT on Android or Android. I think I had too
Okay.
much sun today.
Heat stroke.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wound up throwing together a few things just for background. And I had a unique situation recently. We were visiting, Tracy and I were kind of long overdue to visit our daughter in Worcester, Massachusetts, and our new grandson. We've seen him multiple times before, but there was a long stretch with the Texas eclipse. We were kind of consumed, figuring out that trip and then doing the actual travel. So 2 weeks ago, we decided to go up to visit. And before we left, I thought, let me see what is around there that might be dark sky, because it was new moon week, basically. And Vermont's not that far from central Massachusetts. And I know that there are, pretty barren areas. So I pulled up the same light pollution map that Andrew gave the link for and just looked around. And I found this state park called Molly Stark State Park that is in Bortle 3, like easy Bortle 3 kind of skies. And when I looked at the campground layout, it's not a big park. It's a very small state park. And some of the campsites were near this field. There's like this multi-use field. And I thought, let's give it a shot. It'll break up the drive home. We can go there for a night and just check it out. Well, it turns out that this place is like, and the other thing was that when I looked at the campsite map and booked it, there were like no other campers around us. So I thought, okay, this might make for a good dark sky outing. So Tracy and I wound up doing that as a detour on the way home. And we wound up booking an extra night there. It was so nice. It was just this gorgeous state park. So I had my TV85 with my ASI 2600 MC camera and my AM5 mount. And I thought, well, that's easy enough to just set up in the field. And I almost didn't bring it because it was supposed to rain. It was all this doom and gloom with clouds and everything. Well, it turned out that actually didn't happen. And it was a relatively clear night. So I set up and I imaged the North American Nebula and took some dark sky readings with my SQML meter. And then I have that image, and I have another image. I extended that experiment a little further based on an article Jerry Rodriguez had done back in 2016, I think it was. So if you guys are interested, I could do just a quick little presentation and then show you the images.
Sure.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so let's share screen. I'm going to share my desktop so that I screen one, so that I can move things around. So let's see, and I want to see what you're seeing. Okay, so you can see that. So there we go. Let's go to the beginning. So slideshow from beginning. And I don't want to do that. Do you know how I can just do it from so that there's no preset pane? Tracy, do you know how to get rid of the preset pane? The preview pane?
Just the high presenter view, I think, right where you have it selected.
Where oh, I got it.
Yeah.
Oh, but now did it?
Try F11.
Anyway, I guess we could do it from this. It's fine. Here, I'll just maximize it a little more. Go away. So anyway, there was an article way back that Jerry Rodriguez did on what really is the difference between astrophotography taken in a dark sky site and a not so dark sky site. He lives in suburban Philadelphia. And when, years ago, when we would be up at Cherry Springs, he was up there imaging, 50 feet from me. And when I saw this article about 8 years ago or so, I thought this is a really cool comparison, very brief. I think it was in Sky and Telescope. So I decided to try to duplicate that experiment by imaging this target at this Molly Stark State Park, this really dark sky site, and my backyard, which is, easily 2.5 magnitudes brighter than this state park. So, and I have the results of that. I processed them as closely as I could in PixInsight. So anyway, the incentive for the trip was to visit our little grandson, who's almost 9 months old now. And they're in
That's
this
cool,
area here, Boxford, up in Worcester, Mass. And then this Molly Stark was only about 2 hours away. So instead of just driving home and going through New York traffic and all that, we decided to take sort of a loop this way and come down from upstate New York and then into New Jersey. And this Molly Stark State Park, which is in the southern part of Vermont. So here's Massachusetts, here's Vermont. This is the actual dark sky map information. So it said, when I looked at this, I thought, oh my God, 21.78 magnitudes per arc second squared. That's like seriously dark, right? I mean, Cherry Springs is darker, but not by a lot. So I booked it for that day, and this is the site that we had, and I booked this site right near the field. It's site number 15, if anyone's up there. T is in Tom 15. And I set up the scope after we had dinner that night. And then so the scope was like right out in this field right about here. So I ran an extension cord from the van, and then just I could run it off of batteries, but I had the power, so I used it. And that was the rig. These are actual readings as the night went on. So this is about the 21.35 was probably around 10, 11. No, I'm sorry, around 11:15, because astronomical darkness was around 10:36 at that location. So this is about 45 minutes after that, half hour, 45 minutes after that. This is about 1 in the morning, something like that, 12:30, 1 in the morning. So it's clearly approaching that, the 21.78 that was listed on the light pollution map. And the target was the North American Nebula. So this is 2 hours, exactly 2 hours worth of data, shot with one of those Optolong L-Quad filters. I left that in there because I already had flats for that, and I didn't want to deal with taking flats and doing stuff like that. So I left the filter in because I've also read some stuff that even in a dark sky, the quad band filter actually can have some benefits because of just, stray haze. It was fairly moist that night, stuff like that. Excuse me. And we can look at that. We'll zoom in on that afterwards. So this article I was talking about was called the Astrophotography: The Benefits of Dark Skies. And the question he asked is, can you photograph galaxy star clusters from your backyard? That depends. How light polluted is your yard, and how much time do you have? And typical Jerry, right? So in terms of his sense of humor, I mean, it all depends. So this is a picture from Jerry. This is from Cherry Springs. And the measured magnitude he measured that night was 21.8. This is like a 15-second exposure or something like that. He then compared that to Bella Plaine State Park, where he goes with the South Jersey Astronomy Club, which was magnitude 20.9. Same exposure, same part of the sky. So you can see, as apples to apples as you could get. And then he did it from his driveway in outside of Philly. So magnitude 18.8, same part of the sky. So if I, excuse me, I'm going to get my water. My throat's drying up. Sorry about that. So 18.8. So if you look at those again, and Bella Plaine is a fairly dark sky, right? 20.8's nothing to sneeze at. So he put together this chart because it's basically a magnitude is a factor of 2.51, and he rounded that to 2.5. So if you're one magnitude, if you had a 1 hour exposure at a dark sky site, 21.8, and you did a 1 hour exposure, to get an equivalent in terms of signal to noise ratio, and a 20.8, one magnitude less, you need about 2.5 times the amount of data, and so forth and so on. So this is 6.3 is 2.5 times 2.5, and this is another times 2.5, and another times 2.5. So if you had really bright skies, theoretically, and there's a lot of factors, but just, broad brush, theoretically, you could have a comparable signal to noise ratio if you did a 40-hour exposure. And we've all experienced this, right? We've all, us doing this astrophotography in not so ideal conditions. If you take enough subs and you integrate enough time, you get pretty good shots. So this is my backyard. So this is the map, and these are the actual readings as the night went on. This particular night, this is the lowest. That was about the highest that I got. I did four nights of imaging because I needed a lot of time because I wasn't in a really dark sky. And we'll look at these in more detail. But if you look at the three pictures, that's in my backyard. That's about 5 hours worth of data. That's actually let me do it like that. So I'll do it this way. So that's Molly Stark State Park, 2 hours worth of data. That's my home. That's about 5 hours worth of data, 4 hours and 50 minutes worth of data. And this is both of them combined. Now you notice there's a little bit of image shift just because when I set up again, I didn't have it exactly the same, but obviously close enough. And then that's the intersection of the two. Because when I combined the home and Molly Stark, I started from scratch. So I actually, realigned all the images, recalibrated them with the appropriate darks and so forth. So all of the exposure times were 2-minute exposures.
So Gary, how long was the total exposure from your backyard?
It was about 4 hours and 50 minutes,
And then from the park?
2 hours.
So, wow.
So let's look at these more closely. Okay, everyone gets the drift here, right? So
Yeah, the contrast in your home is much better than from the park.
yeah, and keep in mind that these were processed as closely as I could to one another, and I'll show you what I did. But because the data set's different, I had more background sky. When I had to make something like a black point adjustment, that might be a little different because I'm kind of offsetting the whole image based on what is your background sky glow. I tried to make it as close as humanly possible, but obviously there's going to be some differences. And let me show you what I did. So I'm going to lose this, and let's go to Fiction Site, and let me grab those images. So the other thing I did with the combined was I did a 2x drizzle on just the combined because I had a lot of subs and I had dithered every 3 or 4 exposures. I had changed it because I was having a little problem with the images loading to the iPad. And I thought it might have had something to do with the interval of the dither, but it turned out it wasn't. So I was experimenting, but it's either three or 4 images I dithered. So let's open these. So this is Molly Stark State Park. And I'm going to show you, when I do the combined, I'll show you the decimated image for the comparison. I did a half X sampling, resampling to keep it apples to, oh, sorry. I guess I need to click open. Sorry about that. And then, so let me go to home, the home one. And North American Nebula. So this is just the home data. I keep dragging it over, but it wants me to click open. And then lastly, the combined.
I really like the one from your backyard better than all of them.
I tell you, it's quite encouraging, and this is why I thought this would be neat to show, because we look at these light polluted areas, and there's a lot to be said. This one, the combined one that has all the data, I think I probably went a little too far on the black point, but I mean nothing's clipped. If you zoom in on like a really dark area, there's a little thing in here that almost looks like artifact, this. But if you zoom in on that, even down to the pixels, you can see there's shades of black. And if I look at that, this is not clipped. If I look at the data values. So I really try to be careful on both ends. Obviously, with bright stars, they're kind of sometimes clipped to begin with. But so let's get these all the same scale. So this is Molly Stark State Park. And what I did, if you look on the right-hand side of my screen here, I made tools for every stretch. So this is starless. That was my initial stretch, times 2. This was the third stretch. So I did 3 histogram transfers before I did the generalized hyperbolic stretch. These are my parameters. I save those by, saving an instance of that tool. And then I applied that same exact thing to each image as I was processing. Where it varied was like the last black point adjustment, and then there was one intermediate black point adjustment. But if you look at this, so this is Molly Stark State Park. So if you zoom in on an area where there's a fair amount going on, like the rift in sort of that Baja region, there's a fair amount of detail. Remember, this is 21.4 or something like that, right? In terms of the darkness of it. But if you look at, so let's make the home one the same field of view. So if you look at that, now keep in mind, this is almost 5 hours worth of data. This is 4 hours, 50 minutes. This is 2 hours. But from a sort of detail standpoint, let's make those the same. To me, they're very comparable.
They really are.
Mm-hmm. Very impressive.
And this is as dark as it gets. I mean, when Tracy was in the van, she was kind of resting, and I said, "You got to come out here. I mean, you got to." There were some mosquitoes earlier, and she's a mosquito magnet, so she didn't want to get eaten alive. So they don't tend to bother me that much. I think because all the hair on my arms and stuff, but they go after her. So I said, "You got to come out here." And she like walks out the van, walks out in this field, 20, 25 feet away, and was just blown away. I mean, stars from horizon to horizon kind of thing. And this is the combined. So let's do the same thing. Let's pull that over to the same field of view.
I'm noticing a little more blue in the combined one.
There is. Yeah, I think there is. Now these both had one pass of SCNR, but for the green channel only. These all had one pass of SCNR for green channel. I think there was a little bit of benefit, and I don't know how they, when you're combining these two disparate data sets, same object but vastly different light pollution, and keep in mind that it's also like on the home night there were some high thin clouds that came through a few times, so I pulled those images out the best I could, but that's really hard to judge sometimes, even zoomed in when you're blinking them and trying to do your frame selection. But I think the take home here is that now this is combined, and this one has probably a little more black point. If I zoom in on that dark thing, that dark area, here it is. Let's see if I
mean, these are nothing short of spectacular, Gary.
Yeah, actually, this isn't clipped either. So it might just be a little more aggressive. But I think from a, like encouragement standpoint, if you look at this from like an almost Cherry Springs kind of sky, and you look at this from a backyard, if you just did a broad brush, just kind of took a quick look at these, let me do this. There's really not a lot of difference.
No, not at all, really.
This
And
is
then obviously, combining all the data, you get a little bit more detail, but not really much.
This was the very, very first object I ever took in astrophotography. I was so happy just to see the red because I had the H alpha, the infrared filter pulled out of my camera. It didn't look anything like this at all. But I mean, it was junk, but it inspired me. I guess I got to retry this now, Gary. You're inspiring me. What focal length did you use?
480 millimeters.
I don't have anything close to.
Now, Gary,
480.
how much of this do you attribute to the narrowband filter?
I don't think much.
Okay,
I've done-
because that's going to help a lot, right? Because not a lot of urban light is going to be let through, so you're already kind of helping yourself, right? But you don't think that really played in the experiment at all?
I think it did. Well, I mean, I left it in on both sites because I needed to keep it apples to apples
Right.
in terms of the imaging train. I think it helped a lot on my home site.
Right.
I
Yeah,
don't think it helped much on the the dark sky site. No, I mean it's a good question, and I did take that into consideration. Like normally, when I'm shooting at Cherry Springs, I don't shoot with any filters. I have a piece of clear filter glass so that my focus doesn't change. But and I've had good results with that. But I read an article not too long ago after I bought that L quad filter because I wanted something that was quad band to get closer to true colors if you can. And especially because I'll use that to shoot galaxies, and I really don't want to highlight necessarily H alpha or something if I'm using a dual band filter or O2 or 3 or something with a dual band filter. But so I do think it mattered as far as home. I don't think it did a lot as far as the Molly Stark State Park.
Okay. Yeah, no, gorgeous imagery. Yeah, it'd be cool to do similar tests, but using different bands or something. Due to like the changing lights of the urban environment and stuff. I mean, as much as we love LED lights, it's going to be harder because they're more broad spectrum, than like the sodium lights and stuff. But
right,
cool.
Exactly. And I think the newer filters like that L quad, I think they're trying to factor that in.
Okay.
Because the lighting has shifted to LEDs. Because the older filters, the bands, the stop bands are skewed relative to some of the newer filters because of that factor. And this is my favorite. This is drizzled, and the reason why I really like, and my rig is undersampled, so drizzling helps, and get me more towards an ideal coupling between the focal length and the pixel size. That 2600 has relatively small pixels. I think they're like, what are they? They're 3.6 or 2.9.
3.7. I don't remember.
Yeah. Anyway, they're a little small, so I'm a little my sampling criteria is a little bit out of whack with that setup, but it works. It works fine. But the reason why I really like the drizzling, besides theoretically providing a better match to the optics, the camera and the optics, is when I zoom in on it. I love not seeing the stars pixelate. I love being able to get really close in there,
right,
and zoom around.
Hey, Gary,
Yes,
how narrow is that narrow band? What's the band pass?
they're wide. They're really wide. It's a Optilong L quad.
12 nanometer?
They're what is it?
12 nanometer?
Oh no, way wider.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's considered a broadband filter.
Okay.
more than
It's considered
12.
a broadband light pollution filter. I mean, we can look it up. I don't recall offhand.
That's
But
even
I mainly bought it so I could do galaxies from my backyard
that's even
without
more.
adding a lot of color shift.
Thanks.
So here it is. So they're really wide.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah, I misspoke then. Yeah, that's not really an narrowband. That's cool.
Yeah.
No. It isn't. It is a narrowband. It's actually considered broadband. It's more of a light pollution filter than it is a narrowband filter.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's even more inspiring now. I got to try this, Gary.
But anyway,
The price on that.
I thought that was kind of interesting, and to do the same experiment at home or to do the same thing at home was somewhat of an afterthought, because I was all set up. So when I got home, it was new moon and there were still some clear nights, which has been so rare in the last 2 months. I thought I'm going to take advantage of this. So I just set up in the backyard and I figured, well, I might as well just shoot the same target, see what it does. And as I was doing it, I thought, oh, wait a minute, Jerry had that article years ago. So I actually searched on it. I went to his website, I couldn't find it, but then I thought it was Sky and Telescope. So I actually searched Sky and Telescope, Jerry Rodriguez, dark sky, comparison or something like that, and wound up finding it. So anyway, that's it.
Very, very nicely done. Thank you for sharing, Gary.
You're welcome. You're
Very
welcome.
interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I mean,
It's pretty
something
cool.
that I have really wondered about, how much of a difference going to a dark sky would make, and this is very enlightening.
Well, for me, I'm stuck here in my backyard.
You just need time.
Dark skies, so this is very interesting.
Yeah, and that yeah, and it is like Jerry said in the article, right? How much how light is your sky and how much time you have.
Right.
But with the systems being automated now, I mean, I went to sleep and this isn't a great time to shoot the North American Nebula, because it's 1 o'clock in the morning when it clears the trees.
Right.
Sure it is.
So you're right, exactly. So I set up and went to bed, basically.
What time is astronomical sunrise? Like 3:30? You only have 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I got roughly 2 hours a night.
Yeah.
And that's why when I was at Molly Stark, I got 2 hours worth of data. Because it was sort of like there were some trees and I had to wait for it to clear the trees, and then it was light, the back end of my image. I think I set up for 100 images, something like that. And
Yeah.
I think after 62 or something, the sky it was way too bright for a 2-minute exposure.
Late August, September, we'll be able to get like 4 hours, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you'll be able to get some more.
I just need to get a different. What telescope were you using? Was it the Red Cat?
No, I'm using my old TV85, like Stan. Well, yours isn't as old as mine, Stan, but just a great scope with one of their 0.8 focal reducers.
Maybe I pick up a Red Cat.
Red cats are great. I mean, I would love to have a little wider field of view. I don't really have. I have some shorter focal length refractors, small refractors, like one of the Astrotech 76s and one of the William Optics 66s. But back then, they weren't really designed for astrophotography, so they're not very flat, and even the flatteners now for those that were made for them back then are really hard to find. So there's some generic flatteners, and at that point, I would, the focusers aren't that great. I mean, they're decent, but they're not that great. So I would probably go with a Red Cat or something if I wanted a really wide focal length. I've been using just my camera lens for wider stuff.
I'm still waiting for my Ioptron 70, the amount that you recommended.
Oh, the 70 CEM.
Yeah, I ordered the pier plate first, and that's coming in July, the middle of July, just in case that when I order the mount, there's a 30-day return period, that there's no problem, right? So I want to have the pier plate there to test it. maybe if you're not busy, maybe I can ask you for your help.
Sure, yeah.
I got a couple shots I'd like to share.
Okay.
Um,
Screen Tom.
they're not spectacular, but they're from an 18.8 sky versus even a 19.4. Gary's kind of dark from my place, but
The sun.
I want to know how Gary's sky is so dark, being like 2 miles up the road from me.
That's pretty
What,
cool.
19.4, 19.07?
yeah.
My backyard is 18.4 in Hatfield.
Which plane is that? Is that
Oh, wow.
That-
That's different.
This is a shot that everybody's captured at one point or other, but I just
Yeah.
got another one of these airplane shots the other day, and I figured I'd throw it in there.
That's
Um,
not
Great. That's great.
Is that the
Classic.
Malaysia Airlines flight? Did you find it?
Maybe that's the one that went missing.
It's a stealth one.
I wonder if I can.
Is that a
I
Boeing?
can't get the. I have to do this a little differently. Whoop! Sorry about that. You don't want to see that.
Sunspots are focused perfectly.
This is the rig I have, which is pretty simple. It's just a ioptron mount. This is my old 6-inch
We're not seeing it.
reflector that I bring to the star parties all the time.
Tom,
Tom,
I'm
will you
still
see the photo?
showing the plane. I'm still seeing the plane.
Oh, are you really? Let me get rid of this plane then.
The plane.
And now I'm seeing Tom.
You see this? No.
Not yet, no.
Okay. Well, let me do it a different way here then.
We just see the plane.
There you go. You should see that.
Thomas started screen sharing.
There you go.
Here you go. Al,
Yeah, that's the. Let me. I'm going to change the settings here.
are you sure
Sorry
that
about this, guys.
chair is not going to get melted by the sun?
I can't. Yeah, this is just a batter filter, one of those Mylar type filters. It's the 5. It's the ND5 filter. This is. I don't image inside for the sun lately because I've been having trouble with my. I use the same electric focuser on all 5 different rigs I have, and the Velcro here has to be replaced, so it's not holding the little slip-on motor easily. But anyway, there's a couple more. There's more interesting pictures. I thought I could go forward. Oh, gone. Stinkers. Okay, I'm gonna have to share. Don't have to do this. I'll do this real quick here. I'm gonna just open a couple of these up, and I'll just go from one to the other, and I'll share. I got a couple of galaxy type things I wanted to show you. Almost there. Sorry about this.
Side eye.
And then I'll open this. Okay, now let's see if I can. Okay, so right now you are seeing.
Gray screen.
Let me get back here, and I'll making this a lot harder than it really has to be. Oh, crap.
Tom, did you break the internet?
No, I just thought I could do this easier than this.
Nice shot of the cursor.
Okay, I'm going to have to. Okay, let me stop sharing for a second, and I'll just break these up. Okay.
Tom, if you have things you want to drop on, you can just share your screen and then just open them up on the screen.
Okay,
Like share your whole desktop.
Yeah, I probably should have done that. Anyway, here's. You can be able to see Comet there.
Nice.
That's that 2023 A3. You guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's only a 4-minute exposure, and there's no filters at all. It's just straight shot, 4 minutes only. in like 18.8 skies. So
With what scope?
that's the 8-inch f4.
It's a bright comet.
Yeah. This is M3 the other night, like a 20-minute exposure. Easy one.
Ooh, nice.
What beautiful.
But this is the whale.
Well,
This
yeah.
is
And
this
the
is 45 minutes before it went behind a tree. The whale and the pup.
Yeah, love that.
This is NGC 4527 and 4536. They're kind of like in the they're in Virgo. The this guys here is actually 15th magnitude. Once again, I'm not using any filters or anything. This is from like an 18.8 type sky. And then I got I like this one. This is 5364. It's
Yeah.
pretty good. It's pretty interesting. The arms in there and stuff. This is a 1 hour exposure. Just 1 hour. And finally,
That's
I have the
that's
Eagle
fif-
Nebula.
Oh, the eagle.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Tom, that was 5364, you said?
That was
Galaxy?
5364, yeah. And this
Okay.
one is I forget what this one is. This is 5327 maybe, or is that what the other one was? But this is an elliptical over on
That's
the right.
great detail. Like you're kind of getting like a 3D effect in the middle there. Great detail.
Heck, I'm pretty happy with that for just 1 hour.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
not that high in the sky. It's about halfway up the sky. But the Eagle just barely clears my trees because it's pretty low. And this is 1 hour. Now I didn't use any. I used a filter that they say you don't use. It says this is a visual filter. Don't, this is not meant for photography. Blah 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 blah. It's a real inexpensive filter that I bought when I did I made my binoculars. I needed 2 UHC filters, so I went to Astrotech. This is a $50 filter, $49 filter, and it's kind of like that broadband that Gary was showing. The same thing, except that it has like where the hydrogen alpha and sulfur is. It has that kind of band. It has the band that's the blue green where it's hydrogen beta and O3. It doesn't have the one in the little peak in the middle or the one further out. But so basically, it gives you a fairly. I like this filter visually because the stars aren't green, the stars are white because you have red, green, blue, so all the colors are there. An O3 filter gives you a really artificial thing. It really kind of bugs me. So I use an O3 very sparingly. Only if I'm home looking for something really, really deep, I may do it. But this is anyway, this is a 1 hour of the Eagle under. I mean, from when I took this photograph, I could not see one star in Sagittarius. I couldn't see anything. Couldn't see Lambda. Couldn't see any of those stars. They're all invisible to naked eye.
What time was this?
This was about 11:20 at night.
Okay.
It wasn't near the meridian because where my meridian is, I have my neighbor's oak tree is there, and all I can see is about I can see about from the celestial equator north, and this is about -10 or something, -11. So I have to shoot it when it's not that high in the sky. So Sagittarius the stars don't even come out there because the sky is just white in this part of the sky. But it's pretty amazing. Even in 1 hour, you can pull some stuff up.
Yeah.
That's
Great.
I love this
all
hobby.
I've got. But there's
I'm looking forward to
couple of
nice shots, Tom.
nice. A couple of those black and white galaxies I was pretty happy with because the detail was decent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spiral one. I wonder, I mean, when you look at a galaxy like that, what's going on over there? Is there people out there looking back at us? What the hell's going on? All these galaxies. It's fascinating.
Well, I have one image if you want to see it.
Yeah.
It's the only thing
Same thing that's going over here.
worth seeing for the whole month. And this is one that everybody has imaged many times. And I have too, but this was an effort to get a little better shot on it. More detail, more close up. And I think I accomplished that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I
Very
can't.
nice.
Wait a minute, I gotta open this up. There we go.
Beautiful.
Wow.
So M51 to Whirlpool, very common. But this is the best one I've been able to get.
Steve, is this with your monochrome camera?
This is, no, this is with the Agma, which is color. But I wasn't concerned about processing the color in it. And this is with no filter at all. So kind of different. And it's only, what was this? It was an hour and a half. I had 3 hours of data and threw away half of it. So I thought it was pretty good because I could see some of the lanes, which I couldn't in some of my other images of it that were smaller. So that's all I got.
Oh,
Very nice.
Very nice.
Oh, yeah, looks good.
I took a stab when I was at that Molly Stark. There's a comet that is supposed to get better, as the year goes on at C 2021.
yeah, that was the one that I was showing. Yeah.
No, the 2021 S3 Pan Stars.
Oh, Panstar. Okay.
Yeah, different guy. And I shot that with that rig. And I haven't processed it yet, but I was hoping it would be a little brighter. But I think it's like magnitude 12.8 or something like that.
Yeah, it gets a little tougher, especially with a comet.
Yeah. But here I'll just share I'll just show you a single frame, a single exposure.
Yeah, that 2023, the one that's supposed to be bright in the fall, is still hanging around 10th magnitude, which is not a great sign for its total brightness come the fall.
Yeah. So that's it. See where my cursor is?
Yeah, I see it.
That's the
Yeah.
comet.
Yeah.
That's it.
And this is from 21.6 sky.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that this would take a lot of, this is just 2-minute exposure, obviously. It's just a single.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, well, first of all, I should shoot it with a different rig. But the other thing is that it would take a lot of exposures from my backyard, I think. To get
Yeah.
I don't even know if I'd see it.
Yeah, when's it supposed to get brighter, Gary? Like the November, December, or sooner?
I thought it was more like September, October in that time
Oh,
frame.
okay. So that's pretty much the same time as the other one gets bright.
Yeah.
How bright is it supposed to get?
They're saying it might get I don't know, like magnitude 6 or something like that.
Okay. Well, 6 would be pretty good. Be a lot better.
Yeah, let me see if
I own the Corona Borealis supernova.
I did shoot that Starfield the other
Yeah, me
night.
too.
Shot it in my backyard
Yeah.
when I was waiting for the
Yes,
North American Nebula to get over the trees. I shot that for about 45 minutes, I think, just to have that reference frame.
yes,
It's a pretty faint star, just
it is.
unto itself. It doesn't stand out when you look at the star field.
Yeah, it's like 10th
really stand
magnitude or
out.
something,
Yeah, but you're creating all that stuff that you'd think it's slowly be getting brighter, right? As all that shit.
Evidently, it's kind of it's a real abrupt brightness, and it only stays bright for a few days, which I was surprised that. Who was it? Sylvie gave a little talk on that, and she was saying its brightness stays at that kind of level for about 3 days, and then starts dropping off pretty precipitously. So 3 days is a pretty small. It's a pretty small window around here to try to get it. Because we'd have a clear night is a
Yeah, she was pretty excited when she gave that presentation.
yeah.
Yeah, she did a great job.
I think so. We have a lot of good, interesting young kids like that. Xander is pretty impressive.
Yeah, he's come a long way quickly.
Yeah, yeah, very much so.
Yeah, I like to encourage these guys as much as possible. I'm going to try to think of a project for them to do. Okay, so I was talking to Agapios about their new observatory over there. I'm thinking maybe we could figure out or get one of the kids to as a extra credit assignment for school, maybe to figure out the topocentric parallax between our two observatories, between his site and maybe wherever as long as he's got a 9.25-inch telescope, as long as someone has the same size telescope and we know the GPS coordinates, we can look at the moon and, we document the time, we can figure out exactly how far apart we are. That'd be an interesting science project. Right?
Yeah, the moon is close enough that over that distance, what is it, probably 4,000 or 5,000 miles, at least 6,000 maybe.
6,000 or 7,000 miles.
That I would think you'd notice against the background. If you can get, it has to be a tricky part is having the moon up at the same time in both places.
Right.
Means it has to be pretty. It can't be near a new moon, which means it's going to be pretty bright. So it's going to have to be near some pretty bright stars to
we
be able to pick them out.
I would like
the overexposed moon.
Experiment like that for these guys. Not to mention it'll help us too in the end if we know how far apart exactly the two observatories are when the star goes nova. We know the difference.
An easy way to do that would be to some kind of occultation, right? Like if you knew a star in the background, you could measure the start time of the occultation at one location and then the start time of the occultation at another.
Good thinking.
Then from those time differences, then you can calculate parallax.
Yeah, so we have to figure out when that happens. Anyway, I'm getting kind of tired. Anybody have anything else?
No, I misspoke on that comment, Tom. It's actually receding. That one's receding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it had peak brightness.
They have to shoot it now.
Yeah, it had peak
These
brightness.
are the good days.
Right, and that was. So it's probably like done at this point. The peak brightness looked like it was the second week of January.
Oh wow.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I thought it was pretty bright back then. I thought I knew there was I knew there was a bright comet or a brighter comet back then, but it was from my house it wasn't good because my horizons. But
and by July it's supposed to be like magnitude 16 or 17.
woohoo!
So good luck with that.
Yeah, really. Now you're pushing the envelope in a 2-minute exposure.
I'll see that.
Yeah, actually that's July 2025 because it's pretty far. So July 2024 magnitude 12 predicted, but it's already at magnitude 12. So it's actually fainter than what the predicted magnitude now is supposed to be magnitude 10, but it's more like magnitude 12 point something.
Yeah, that the 23A3 that originally they were saying it might be bright enough to see in the broad daylight, but it is a first timer, and those first timers are notoriously bad because they blow off all that light dust very quickly, and they brighten up, and you can see them ridiculous distances away, and they're quite bright. But they're saying basically, I think it has to be now they've gone down from like it was originally -4. Now they're saying about magnitude 1 to 1.5 magnitude at its peak. Wow. But to do that, even it has to probably be because the mid-July time frame, there's a time frame that's going to lay it out there. If it's not at least magnitude 7, it won't reach 1.5 probably either. Probably be more like a 2.5. That's still great though. I mean, I think Comet near wise was like 1.8 or 2.0, right around that range, and that was great. It was a
Yeah.
really nice comet, and it has a decent tail now already because of all that fluff is blowing off the back. I mean, the tail is like 12 minutes long, but
Yeah. Where is it located? Where when you shot that?
it is in. It was in Virgo, almost in Como at the time, but down a little bit lower. For me, it's getting lost. I can't do it in twilight because it's already hit my trees in my west. But if you have a decent west, it's still pretty good. It's still pretty easy to photograph.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was magnitude 10. It was about magnitude 10 and a half early May when I first took a picture, and I took one at the end of May. That was the picture I showed you. It was the end of May, and it would drop down to about 10 even, that ballpark. But
So,
there
yeah.
are some more pictures of it though coming up on that spaceweather.com, where they have all the people submit their photos of different
Yeah,
things.
the
There's
photo
several of those
gallery.
coming up now. So the tail still looks pretty good. But like in my backyard, visually, I could not see it at all. I couldn't even see a hint of it, even with averted vision. Even the coma was like, it just wasn't there because my sky's so bright. But it shows up, the exposure I had showed was only a 4-minute exposure. But it was far enough away that it didn't start to trail in 4 minutes. 4 minutes was the limit. I know at 5 minutes I could tell the nucleus was becoming elongated, but up to 4 minutes, which is pretty long for a comet.
It is.
That's was the longest one I've ever shot actually without trailing. But as it gets closer, of course, it's going to start shrinking to 3 minutes and 2.5 minutes, and before it starts mixing in with the background stars, moving too much. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Very cool.
there you go.
Hey, you guys know
Okay.
who the speaker is this Friday?
It's on cartography, isn't it? Isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's about the constellations. I think the history of the constellation.
Yeah. Is he from like the Lehigh Astronomical Group? Do
I think
want to
she is.
see
He's
that?
from
Yeah.
Elbash.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
he's
Okay.
from Elbash.
Yeah. And I saw that Jeremy in September got the guy who's in Princeton who was involved with the Voyager launch and probe that has come back to life again. It kind of they kind of shut it. They lost all contact with it sort of for about a month or so, and it's back to life. And all 4 instruments are still operating, and it's really pretty wild.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So launched in '77, I think it was. It's amazing. But back then, the components they use were really like big hunking components. I mean, they're like capacitors and like resistors and
They were
like really
TTL.
heavy
They were
duty.
TTL. A lot of that stuff.
Yeah, all the solder lines. I mean, it wasn't surface mounted chips. It was big hunking solder of things everywhere. So a couple, a gamma ray or two isn't going to damage it. It's just
Those capacitors are probably bad by now, just over time.
yeah, but it's amazing that stuff is just 46 years or something or
You know,
40
man,
years.
As a reminder, I was not born yet.
Yeah.
There you go. There's a perspective.
Yeah.
Just want to make you guys feel young.
That's when I was working for GE Aerospace making those things, and everything was TTL. I mean, for the
Yeah.
military stuff, we use CMOS because it was inherently more rad hard than straight TTL is not rad hard at all for radiation stuff for for nuclear blast stuff. But it blows my mind that is still going.
Yeah, and then all 4 instruments are still working. It's really ridiculous. It isn't like it's sending back a signal and it's just from one instrument. It's they're all working. It's like that's ridiculous.
yeah,
Pretty cool though. Anyway, he's going to be coming to give a talk, which would be really kind of fun.
That'd be fun. Yeah.
But the whole thing that's in September.
All right, well, I'll try to be there on Friday. I can't make any promises. I haven't seen you guys in a while, but
yeah, I'm hoping to be there.
I can't make it Friday, unfortunately. I was supposed to go to a concert that my my son had gotten us get the let out tickets at the Keswick
Oh,
for
Oh, nice.
Father's Day. So I'm going with my grandson, who's a Led Zeppelin fan. My son is, and I am. So we're going to do this multi-generational. And
Oh, there you go.
he gave us a printout of the ticket thing, and it was Saturday night. Saturday. So the other day he texted me yesterday, and he says, "Hey, do you want me to pick you up Friday night for the concert?" I said, "What do you mean Friday night? It's Saturday." And he said, "Oh, let me double check." And sure enough, he bought it for the wrong night. They're there both nights. So I said, "Oh well, I have to bail out of the astronomy meeting."
Yeah.
Anyway,
It should be fun.
yeah,
Yeah, it should be fun.
yeah,
It's a good venue.
Great.
it is.
my wife went to see Stevie Nicks at Hershey, and then right when she was finishing dinner, concert was canceled. Somebody got sick,
Oh man.
so now she's got to go back there. But all these old acts, they're expensive. We went to see Fleetwood Mac. We wanted to see Fleetwood Mac. When was it they came around last? And the nosebleed seats were $400.
Oh wow.
Yeah, not cheap.
But not that much.
That's too rich for my blood. I don't know.
I
That's
mean,
the price of a camera.
There you go. There's a perspective, and a camera.
Yeah, right.
Over
It's
and
almost a sea star.
exactly. Well, that's for one person. So you figure multiply by 2, then you have the night out for dinner and parking. What are they going to get you for parking?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, the
you
club, by
talking,
the way,
$1,000.
yeah, I guess maybe Gary probably knows and all, but the club has bought a sea star now. It's going to be at the meeting on Friday night. Joe's going to bring it. He picked it up. He has it in his hands, and so it's going to be a rental scope with the rest of them, which is a pretty cool idea for
That's
people.
really good. That's a great idea.
Yeah,
Great idea. That'll
Yeah.
bring a lot of people, I think, to the.
yeah. So
I bet there'll be a waiting list for that. The other scopes will be sitting there still.
yeah, really, that's going to be. We'll probably end up buying 1 or 2 more. It'll be a moneymaker.
There you go.
It'll be a cash cow. I wonder what they're going to rent it for. Probably 10 to 20 a month, I guess, somewhere in there.
That's such a bargain.
Yeah. I'm trying to convince this one school that I go to occasionally to buy one, because versus trying to come up with buying a camera, hooking it up to it. They have an 8-inch f4.5 astrograph, but to get the kids have such little time, and to be able to take them out, do a long exposure, and these kids want to see a couple things, so you're talking really short exposures,
Yeah.
going through the whole processing curve and everything. Let's get the sea star. Let's get them up and running quickly. Get something, and then we can do some little bit of processing. Maybe if we save the raws, then we can kind of teach serial and things like that. Inexpensively, and if they want to do more processing on the image beyond what the sea star gives you, and so we'll see how that works out. But he's supposed to put in the budget, the teacher I work with, but who knows?
Definitely a great place to start.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really gonna make a difference, I think, with that.
Well, it's the wave of the future now, I think.
Yeah, basically lowering the bar to entry, right? You're really
Sea Star's just
really
Sea Star's
getting rid of a lot of those obstacles that have driven all of us crazy at times, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
the quality to price ratio is ridiculous.
And the
Right.
fact that it focuses so well.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You have autofocus. It's everything. It was ridiculous. The autofocus, the built-in solar filter. I mean, or you get it with it. You get so many pieces that are just insane.
I know.
know?
It's a great tool, all of those
Yeah.
EAA kind of scopes.
Yep. It's